a little bit of cleaning up to do here before we move forward into Mantegna. We looked at these downtown very briefly too, but we left off talking about this first round of Renaissance artists in Venice, responding in some ways to a series of artists from Florence who had made their way into Venice in the 1430s and 40s. But also, really, I think when we were looking at Giovanni dalla Magna, one of the things that we didn't talk enough about, but was absolutely true, was the degree to which Jacopo Bellini's interesting perspective and complex narrative spaces that we read about was important for other artists in Venice as well. Beginning with Jacopo Bellini, we'll find that that family is really the dominant family in painting. Jacopo and his two sons, Gentile and Giovanni, is the dominant family of painters in Venice for the rest of the 15th century, right? Everybody else is sort of following their lead, and they're recognized as such. People know that. Even visitors to Venice. Albrecht Dürer, a German artist, came to Venice in 1506, said, Jacopo Bellini is really old, but he's still the best there is. Right? I mean, just people recognize them as being the top of the notch. And the fact that with somebody like Giovanni dalla Magna, whose name means from Germany, right? Alemannia is Germany in Italian. Giovanni of Germany. He's a German import, if you will, a German expat. Venice, we read, was a city of immigrants, right? He's one of them, makes his career entirely in Venice. But the complex architectural space that forms the background for this, that organizes the groups of figures, right? It's more than just a background. He's using it as an organizational principle, right? This is something I think that has everything to do with what Bellini is interested in as well, that we read about, right? Now, one of the things that's interesting about Giovanni dalla Magna is that he was brother-in-law to another painter named Antonio Vivarini. Now, one of the things that we see often in Venice is this idea of cottage industries of painters. By cottage industry, I mean a family of artists, right, who work as a sort of artistic dynasty. So we've got Jacopo Bellini and his two sons, Gentile and Giovanni. We've got Antonio Vivarini working. He's got a brother, Bartolomeo Vivarini. And he's got a son, Alvise Vivarini, right? So another dynasty of painters there. And this is something we see often in the arts and in crafts in the 15th century. But for my money, you see it a lot more in Venice than you do anywhere else, right? So part of this extended dynasty of painters is Giovanni dalla Magna, who is married to Antonio Vivarini's sister. He's his brother-in-law. And we'll see when we look at the Bellini family that Mantegna, Andrea Mantegna, one of the really most prominent artists in the 15th century, is married to Jacopo Bellini's daughter. So he's part of this dynasty as well, right? So again, this idea of a family group of painters, something we see again and again. Okay? With Giovanni dalla Magna and Antonio Vivarini, and we don't have a Vivarini here to show you, I don't think. I've got one from Walters, but it's really in this crappy shape. I shouldn't record myself when I'm going to say words like crappy, should I? I'll go back in and bleep it out. They worked together, Giovanni dalla Magna and Antonio Vivarini. They took commissions, the two of them working side by side, in a shared style, which is kind of an interesting idea, isn't it? You're going to work with somebody, both of you painting, for example, frescoes in a chapel, or even a larger altar piece. And you're going to be trying to work in a way that people can't tell you apart, right? You're not going to work in a way where Jay's part of the altarpiece will look different than Amanda's. You're going to work in a way where you're going to emulate a shared style, such that people can't tell it apart. And this has made our life, historians' lives, more difficult because many of these works are not signed. So stylistically, we know it's a Vivarini/Alla Magna work, and then sometimes we might get external evidence, like a commission, that would separate A from B, but it remains very, very difficult for us, right, to tell them apart, because they always work together. Now, what's interesting for us here in the D.C. area is we have the only work by Giovanni dalla Magna that was signed by Giovanni dalla Magna all by himself, right? There's no signature of Antonio Vivarini. It's the St. Jerome on the right. That's up in the Walters. That's what WHAM stands for. We haven't seen one of these yet. Walters Art Museum in Baltimore has a pretty good Renaissance collection. Nowhere near as good as ours, right? At the National Gallery, few are, but good, and we can add to it as well. So here's St. Jerome. I'm holding a book and a church, probably his home church, although it's not particularly clear. St. Jerome appears often in Venetian paintings, as some of you know because you're working on a St. Jerome or talking about it. But he appears in numerous guises. The most common way for St. Jerome to appear in Venetian art is as a hermit in the wilderness, like in a cave, worshiping a crucifix, beating on his chest with a rock so he remains uncomfortable in his flesh and thus more focused on spiritual matters versus physical comfort. In this case, St. Jerome appears in the role of a cardinal, a church cardinal. He's one of the four church fathers. And even though he spends time in the wilderness praying, denying again earthly comfort, right? We also often see him wearing the robes and the hat of a cardinal because he's one of the four. He's responsible for the Latin version of the Bible, right? The Vulgate version of the Bible is St. Jerome's Latin translation of the different ancient texts and cleaning up the loose ends, right? Tying up things. So making sure that somebody didn't mistranslate some Aramaic here and some Hebrew there. He brought it all together, right? So the book that he's holding is probably a reference to that, right? The church, I can't tell you for sure why he's holding a church. That's a relatively rare thing. But it could be a church that's dedicated to him. We're not 100% sure here. And as you can see, the picture's a little bit of a wreck. I've got a couple of nice little details from the Walters. These are not my photos, but came from the Walters Art Museum. But you can see that if it weren't in such sort of bad shape, we would have been able to see more detail in the space. We're sort of missing, when paintings get damaged through time and cleaning and whatnot, just sort of general mistreatment, one of the things we'll often lose is the last layer of modeling that really tightens up the dark darks and the light lights and the shadows on his cheeks and his eye sockets and whatnot. You can see it kind of missing. Some of the details in the beard are sort of washed away, right? We would expect it to be more. And I might imagine that we could also perhaps even begin to read some of the words on the page. Although those are sometimes left as just sort of bird scratch, you know? Although sometimes they can see it, right? You'll notice that it's still, in some respects, harkening back to that old Gothic style, the Byzantine style that we saw a week ago, with the gilded background and the pattern, right? But we still have that new interest in modeling and in detail that we saw with other works by Alemania, and we saw also with Giacomo, right? And that's owing to the influx of Florentine art. The signature, and I know this doesn't really show it well, but you can make out the letters there, is actually along the edge of the stem, beneath his feet, right? So on the edge, just before it cuts in that alcove, you can see some of the letters there, and that basically says that, you know, Giovanni dalla Magna painted this, right? Sorry? It's, right, along there. And if on the far right of that, you can see some of the letters there against the black, right? So, right, a unique work for not the greatest of paintings, but it's a very important one. This is one of those things that plagues us, right, as art historians. It's not maybe the one you want to have hanging in your house, but it's the only signed work by Giovanni dalla Magna in the world. And it's just up the street, so to speak, just up 95 from here. Now, we also at the Walters have a very badly damaged work by Antonio Vivarini, who is Giovanni dalla Magna's partner, and again, the head of this other dynasty of painters in the 15th century alongside the Bellini. A multi-paneled altarpiece of a type that we'll see frequently, right? So all these panels fitted together into a frame. I don't think that this is the original frame. It looks a little newer than that to my semi-trained eye. I'm not a frame expert, right? And the fact that the St. Michael in the center on the bottom is so badly damaged makes me think that the frame is in kind of a little bit too good a shape to go with those panels, right? But who knows? Like, it could be. I've been more wrong than right in these things. But we have a series of saints on the bottom that gives us a sense for what Giovanni Bellarmini's St. Jerome might have originally fitted into. Also gives us a sense for some of the other works, such as the St. Peter by Giambono that we saw, what it might have fitted into as well. A grouping like this one, where there's a central panel with saints facing it from either side. And in this case, two-tiered with half-length figures up above. So this is somewhat special in that they're all together still, despite the heavy wear and tear to some of the individual panels. Right? It's still all together in one piece as opposed to scattered through 8 different, 9, 10 different collections. Right? So in that respect, it's quite special for that to be here. Now, there are more of these, obviously, sitting together back in Italy. But by the time they make it here, it's often that they're just cut up into little pieces by unscrupulous dealers. What caused the damage, I can't tell you, right? What actually caused the damage. But you can see the center panel is the Archangel Michael, who is always depicted slaying a demon or a dragon. Right? If demon is better, dragons are St. George, right? Dragons prowl the earth in legend. Demons prowl the supernatural realm. And St. Michael, therefore, battles the demon. But you can see it looks like a dragon. You can see its tail swirl up on the left-hand side of that central panel. And then the area where the demon is actually being slain, being skewered by a sword, is the bit that's all worn away. Right? So that's the center panel. That may be some clue as to where this was originally seen, in a chapel dedicated to St. Michael, since he's so prominent, or perhaps commissioned by someone for whom St. Michael was especially important. For example, someone named Michael, someone born on the feast day of St. Michael, right, who doesn't necessarily have to be named St. Michael, someone who belonged to a confraternity dedicated to St. Michael. These are all possibilities. We almost always need your say, it must have been Michael somebody, but that's not always the case. Not even 50% of the time. Right? Yeah, Jay.
I think wings. So is that the angel Michael?
Michael always has wings as well. Yeah, the Archangel Michael is depicted with wings.
But this is a different Michael? Saint Michael? Are they?
No, they're the same. Saint Michael and Archangel Michael are the same. The Archangel Saint Michael. Yeah. That's one and the same. So when you hear Saint Michael, right? So it's the Archangel Michael at the bottom, right? Madonna and Child at the top. We can make out the saints at the bottom are not specified enough for even the experts at the Walters to suggest who they might be. It's very difficult to tell for sure, right? And again, this is not the best of pictures. This is not normally out on display either. Right? We have a couple of bishop saints, monk saint on the left bishop's path, right? On the far right, a martyr, and we know that from the palm that they're holding, but how they were martyred or who they are is another question. Up above the Virgin and Child, equally badly damaged. You get the sense maybe that there was a candle in front of it, right, that got a little bit too high and whacked it. What better thing for a demon than to be burned up by a candle in a church, right? But anyway, that's the same damage that we see to the panel with the Archangel Michael down below. We also see, to a lesser extent, with the Virgin and Child at the bottom. And then the four figures on the side have been identified as being the four evangelists, although I don't know why they think that, because it does not seem as if there's enough there to say for sure they are who they are. There are no symbols. For example, each of the four evangelists has a symbol that helps us to identify them, and those are not there. There may be, I can't tell from this slide, there may in fact be some inscriptions in their halos that might help. I also wonder the degree to which the arrangement that we see is the original arrangement. Because you'll notice that two of the saints face left and two of them face right, yet they've got it set up so that you've got one facing each way, left and right. Does that make sense? So down below you'll notice that everybody faces towards St. Michael. Up above, you might imagine that they would all eventually face toward the Virgin and Child as well. So since those panels are all exactly the same proportions and whatnot. I wonder if this is the original arrangement or not. For what it's worth, some details. I don't know if it makes anything really easier to see up above, but there it is, slightly larger. And you go back and make it even bigger still in the PowerPoint that's on Canvas. And there's down below, and again, I don't think that makes anything easier to see. The layer of varnish over the top of it, right? When we have even these pictures, there'll be a layer of varnish over the top of the big tempera paint. And you can see that it's oxidized pretty badly, so it's become sort of cloudy. Like, one of the things that freaks me to no end is when the inside of the car windshield gets dirty, just from breathing and whatnot. That's what that looks like. It's hard to see the yield through the varnish. Well, we looked at Jacopo Bellini downtown, and so there's really not a whole lot of reason to go back over him again. We talked about the fact that both St. Anthony on the left and St. Bernardino on the right come from very, very different time frames. There's not much here that reflects our reading on Bellini, on his use of perspective, because they so crowd out any background that all we can really see are these mountains and the small building back there. That doesn't give Bellini a lot of opportunity to apply his perspective studies. St. Anthony is from the 4th century, Bernardino from the 15th century. Bernardino was dead for no more than about 15 years when this was painted, right? Each one of them wears the robes of the monks that are dedicated to them. So in other words, those are anachronistic clothes. St. Anthony is clothed like an Antonine monk. St. Bernardino is clothed like a Benedictine monk, right? So that's somewhat anachronistic. They each have symbols that help to identify them. Anthony's cane, he was a very ancient saint. He, by legend, lived to be over 100 years old, well over, like over 130 years old. Spent over 100 years living in the desert, being fed by a raven every day that God had dispatched to keep him alive. Thus, he always appears quite aged, and you'll notice that the city in the background, well, maybe even like city, the building in the background that we have, this is a little blurry, but nonetheless, gives you the sense almost of a monastery set up in the wilderness, in the desert, at the bottom of this arid mountain. Its doors are open, we can see inside of it, but even at that, Anthony and Bernardino are removed from it, right, to accentuate the idea that they have left behind the comforts of civilization in order to devote their every thought to God. Bernardino in the 15th century preached often on the power of the name of Jesus, the power of just his name, and so he is always depicted carrying a symbol with the moniker for Christ on it, the initials of Christ on it, right? And that then helps us to identify him well. Okay. What else? Anthony in particular, let's see, we looked at the flowers. I don't have answers to what they symbolize, but they seem so Bellini focused on them to such a degree in painting them and trying to get them just right, that makes me think they've got to be there for a reason. Right? Now, St. Anthony has quite a bit of local prominence in the region around Venice. His remains are to this day housed in the city of Padua. Now, Padua is just on the mainland. It's part of the region we call the Veneto, V-E-N-E-T-O, or the terra firma, right, the solid land. These are the regions of the territory around the Lagoon of Venice that were controlled by Venice, part of the Venetian Republic, right? And it went pretty much as far as Mantua to the left, up around Verona. These are all parts of the Veneto, the terra firma, right? So Padua is part of that, and had been since 1405 or so, right? became part of the Venetian Republic. Now, if you remember from Intro to Art History, those of you who took it, Padua is also the home of a really prominent cycle of frescoes by Giotto, dating to the 14th century, right? The famous Arena Chapel frescoes are there as well, right? So these things are part and parcel of what becomes eventually Venetian art. Now, because St. Anthony Abbot figures so prominently, and because his remains are here in Padua, there is some possibility that Bellini's work was made for a church in Padua, maybe even the Church of St. Anthony, right, which is still there. Here is, this is the church where Anthony Abbott's remains are housed. It's called the Campo in downtown Padua, right? And it's the home of quite a few really very, very prominent works of art. One of the suggestions, and this has not really been proven, is that it belonged to an altarpiece that was in a chapel that was actually supported by this guy here. Is my laser, did that work good? Here's the pen. That guy there is a prominent mercenary soldier. Condottieri is the fancy term for that. A mercenary soldier whose nickname was Gatta Malata. Right? Here he is. Right. Gatta Malata. Erasmo Denardi. Gatta Malata in Italian means calico cat, and it had to do with his hair. Right? He had the color of a calico hat, multicolored hair. Right? That came back, and so his family had a chapel inside the Church of St. Anthony. And it's been suggested that our panel came from an altarpiece that was actually in Gatta Malata's chapel inside the church. Here's the famous Donatello sculpture of Gatta Malata outside that chapel. We'll talk about Donatello a little bit next, right? Because he's part of that group of Florentine artists who come to Venice and the Veneto and have a monster impact on other artists who are working there. Right? So that leaves our early Renaissance behind. We're going to jump ahead and talk about Mantegna next. But really what we've been seeing with the three prominent works that we looked at from the National Gallery, right, and the others from the Walters as well, is that what we're trying to do is explain the meaning of these pictures, both on a simple level, but sometimes on a symbolic level as well. We're trying to explain the style of the pictures, and we're trying to do that all within a historical context, right? We're going to look at the region, look at the history, and see how that helps us understand some of the choices the artist made in making the works of art. If you're not familiar with art history classes, that's really what we spend all of our time doing. And that leads us here in the middle of the 15th century, this early Renaissance, to talk about really the first prominent major artist. Not that the little Jacopo Bellini, he's best remembered for those sketchbooks with those amazing perspective designs in there. But Mantegna's a pretty heavy hitter. And we've got a couple Mantegnas in the National Gallery. We're better suited to talk about his engravings, which we will. But I brought in a few that were from the textbook, right? So when it says plate 40 up there, that's where you can find it in the Humphrey book that you're supposed to have bought, right? And so that will help us to do it, although most of the exams will be based on local works of art. But this way you can go back and read more about it by finding it in the textbook, right? So if it's in the textbook, I'll be putting that up there. I should mention that our Bellini is also in the textbook. I didn't put it up there, right? But you can find it in the textbook as well. So, Andrea Mantegna was active also in Padua. That was his primary center of focus. But remember, that's part of the Venetian Republic. So even though it's not in the city of Venice proper, it is, in fact, part of the grander idea of Venetian painting, right? I was born around 1430. Padua had been part of the Republic since 1405, so he always thought about himself as being part of the Venetian Republic. And as we look at Mantegna's work, and we'll look at it quite closely, we'll see some of the same issues we've been talking about. That influence of Florentine artists, artists from Florence, that we saw with Giovanni Dallamagna, Jacopo Bellini, right, Antonio Vivarini, John Bono. But also we'll see with Mantegna the influence of those guys, those Venetian artists as well. And in particular Giovanni Dallamagna, so a huge influence from him. When Mantegna was only 18 years old, he became an independent artist. He declared his independence from his teacher, which is pretty rare and pretty young, and Mantegna seems to have been something of a prodigy, a child prodigy. But in 1448, at 18 years old, he gets the commission to fresco a chapel in Padua. And he's working on one wall of the chapel, frescoing it, and on the opposite wall, same chapel, same time, is Giovanni Dallamagna and Antonio Vivarini working together. So these three artists are in the same room at the same time in 1448, right? Working on opposite walls of the same chapel. Okay, so we should expect this older generation of artists, Dallamagna, Antonio Vivarini, to have some rub off on the younger artist, Mantegna, right? And that's certainly something people always point to as part of the mix of things that goes into what makes Mantegna Mantegna. What we'll see is very early on, he staves out something that looks like nobody else but him. And that'll become clear as we look at his pictures. The other Venetian influence on Mantegna is Jacopo Bellini, because as I mentioned just a few minutes ago, Mantegna married Jacopo's daughter. Right? So he's in the family of painters that includes Jacopo, his son Gentile, and his other son Giovanni. Right? Mantegna is that younger generation's brother-in-law. He's the son-in-law to Jacopo Bellini. So we should immediately expect to see some impact from these different artists. The ones he's working around and the ones he's related to. And so he gets from them this new interest in three-dimensional modeling of costuming, but also a certain hard-edged linearity. And as we look at the details of the Fanzino altarpiece in Verona, which is part of the Veneto, one of his earliest major compositions, he's only 25, 26 years old when he starts it. Like, again, a prodigy. But one of the things we'll see that comes out of Bellini, Jacopo Bellini, are elaborate spatial constructions. And I think you can already begin to see that. Look at the upper part of the Fanzino altarpiece, and look at this range, the space he's constructed for the figure of the Virgin and Child and all of these things to be arranged within. It's really elaborate and unified and consistent. And again, that's one of Jacopo's great interests, right, that we read about, making those kind of spatial constructions. Even the paintings along the bottom, the predella, right, those two paintings also show very elaborate spatial constructions. And this is a hallmark of a lot of Mantegna's work. Right? In addition to that, there are these artists that came from Florence to work in Venice that we talk about and we'll talk about numerous times. Filippo Lippi was in Venice and the Veneto around 1430. Left a number of works behind. None of them have survived till today. But his works and the Florentine artists present for Mantegna the example of a sort of hard-edged draftsman-like quality. Now let me explain what I mean by that. There are numerous ways one can paint, right? You can paint where you're painting atmosphere and you use shadows to blur the edges of things, or colors run over and blend between the object you're painting and the background behind it. Or you can delineate those edges, hard and sharp edges, right? Lippi is a delineator. The Florentine artists tend to be these draftsmen, where their paintings are like drawings with color, drawings in color, rather than celebrating the color for its own sake, which is something we see more of with Venetian artists. So the edges of the Virgin's face, the transitions between the nose and the space behind it, are treated with a sort of hard-edged sculpturally quality, maybe? Is that coming through clear? A little bit, right? Another artist who comes from Florence to Venice in around the 1440s, does designs for mosaics in San Marco, does other works, is Andrea del Castagno. And his works are even more hard-edged. Look at the robe here, and how all of the pleats of the robes don't have sort of a soft modeling, but rather a kind of almost crisp, starchy quality, right? To where the highlights become sort of white lines that he draws, and the shadows also dark, right? They're still modeled in chiaroscuro, right? A range of lights and darks, but there's a linear quality, right? That separates form from background, form from form. Look at his fingers. Look at the rope from David's sling. Look at the lines in Goliath's space between David's ankles. Right? Look at the robe or the hair of David himself. Right? This is the hallmark for Castagno's drawing style. Really edgy. Right? These things will come into Mantegna's work. The third artist, and the one everybody points to, is this amazing sculptor, Donatello, who comes to Padua for 10 years in 1443. He'd already worked for the Medici family. He already become sort of the most important sculptor in Florence. And he gets this major commission, 2 or 3 major commissions, in and around the cathedral in Padua, the Cathedral of St. Anthony. So he does this oversized, over-life equestrian statue of Gattamelata, Erasmo di Narni, which remains through the Renaissance one of the most beloved amongst artists and others as well of early Renaissance sculptures. Right? Fantastic knowledge of horse anatomy, except maybe the idea that horses don't put both legs forward on the same side at the same time, because they tip over if they do that. Fred, he didn't get that part right, but the rest of it's spot on, right? The musculature of the horse, the power of the individual himself, the composition of that baton and his sword, giving that great diagonal that thrusts it forward. Fantastic, right? But the work that seems to have had the greatest impact on Mantegna is the pulpit of the cathedral attachment that Donatello also constructed multimedia, including the cast bronze statues of the crucifix and figures down below, but then also those plates, those relief plates that make up the marble bit down below. And I wanted to show you a detailed one of those so you get a sense for how this impacted, I hate that, impact not a verb, impacts now, how that had an impact on Mantegna. Here's one of the plates from the Padua pulpit. And Donatello was great about working in levels of relief to create a pictorial space. And look at this unified and yet sophisticated space that Donatello has created in the Padua pulpit for this miraculous scene, one of St. Anthony's miracles. The crowd of figures in the foreground, but how that space around it provides them a credible, highly detailed, perfectly perspectival space for this to exist in, where even our eye level is a little bit below the level of the floor, so we only see the feet of the people in the very front row, and it tips away from us. Look at Mantegna now, especially the upper part of Mantegna's work. And you can see that he's created a space that's really very similar to this, that goes behind those columns of the original frame, but create a unified space that drops back at roughly eye level for these saints to exist within. So for us, historically speaking, Mantegna's early work becomes this amalgam of influences, both local and imported, right? Both the local Venetian artists, in particular Jacopo Bellini, but then this influx of Florentine artists, and the most important of which is for him is Donatello. Right? Now let's look at the details of the Santino altarpiece. You can see the degree to which Mantegna has that hard, linear quality that we saw in some of those Florentine works. It really is drawing with the brush. Now the colors are rich and saturated, as we might expect from Venetian art, but the way he's painting is really incredibly linear. And if you look at the clouds, for example, behind the architecture on either side of the Virgin Mary, you start to see how he's outlining them with very sharp edges on those clouds, right? Or even the architecture itself, which is very credible marbleizing, isn't it? It's very good. But also you'll notice all of these marble reliefs that you see, whether there's the roundels at shoulder level behind the Virgin Mary, or that frieze above her head with those ancient Roman putti in them. I also love her halo, right? That solid architectural stone circle behind her head. The real halo is a little red bit, right? But directly behind it is this design element of that wheel, which is, again, drawn with such precision. And I think that's maybe the best word to have for this, is precision, right? Mantegna is an incredibly precise draftsman, right? He's also very, very interested in actually studying examples of Roman artifacts. So when he includes architecture with decorations, we can often trace what he's been looking at. And he's one of the earliest artists to really move beyond, or move to a true idea of the Renaissance. Okay, now Renaissance means rebirth, right? We talked about that before. Renaissance is the rebirth of an interest in ancient Roman art. Okay? For most artists around 1450. That interest is in Roman art for two things. One, a sense of realism, right? We've already seen some of that. That gets away from those Byzantine artificial folds and whatnot. But the second thing is to find these Roman body types and translate them into, bury them within, a Christian composition. Mantegna goes a step further and includes Roman sculptures, relief and three-dimensional, in his pictures as Roman sculptures. So in this case, behind the head of the Virgin Mary is this Roman relief frieze that very much looks like a Roman relief frieze. It's not trying to be something Christian. Mantegna has, and will maintain through his life, an almost archaeological fascination with Roman art. Is stronger than anybody working around the year 1450. There's no one that holds a candle to Mantegna when it comes to an interest in Roman prototypes. Okay? It would be Christmas, although I'm not going to show you this because we don't have it in the local collection. But we'll see other things that we do. Right? So let's look at all three of these. We see that credible space that he's created. How even as that three-dimensional frieze wraps around the edges, you can see that he's actually modeling it seen from the side, which is pretty incredible, right? He's hung these Roman garlands, which are based on architecture he's seen, but he makes them look like real garlands now in front of all of that. He has those roundels that appear on all four sides of each of those pilasters, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different pilasters that you see that make up the space. And they all seem very credible. They all look like they've been studying some ancient Roman art in order to get the inspiration for them. In addition to that, even the figures themselves, the saints in the foreground, may well draw back on Roman types. And we'll see this more in other works by Mantegna. Notice his really thorough understanding of perspective as well. How the perspective not only determines the space, but the figures themselves get smaller as they move back into that space. Even the floor, the checkerboard floor underfoot, right, really gives you a sense of three-dimensionality. The two angels with playing lutes in the foreground of the center panel move out and into space in a way that shows he fully gets it. Now, perspective, right? The idea of one-point perspective. I did something on the board before, didn't I, for you guys? You guys have a draw perspective, right? Everything goes back to a single vanishing point, like if you're on a highway in the desert, right, and it just looks like it comes to a point. Okay, and there's a mathematical way you can calculate exactly how far. That idea of mathematical one-point or even two-point perspective did not exist before 1420. And it was not written down by anybody until 1435. That's pretty recent stuff, right? That's like, you know, for us, it's like the internet. This is something, you know, I mean, but still, you know, a touch screen phone is 10 years old, right? This is only 10, 20 years old at the time that man meant it, and he's getting it. He understands it. Obviously, that sort of obsessive approach to art making that we see in his interest in Roman artifacts also applies to his interest in perspective. Right? He's obsessive. And his works are obsessive, and that's part of the thing I like about them, is that certain obsessive quality. Every inch of surface by Mantegna gets some attention. They didn't have dead spaces, right? And this will become clear as we look at details. Now let's look at the predella down below, right? These are those three scenes that appear beneath the main corpus of figures. We have three scenes from the life of Christ, so directly beneath the Virgin and Child, we see the Virgin and Child. Except in this case, in a narrative scene, telling the story of the crucifixion. And as you look at it, you'll notice again the obsessive creation of space. Look at the figure in the foreground. Isn't that wild? He's carved out part of the rock of Golgotha, made steps there, simply to sort of establish a perspective to the space. And then he puts this figure in the foreground of it, appearing in front of them. And it's very odd because I don't see it in the picture down here. But I see it there. I'm curious about that little guy, the red guy, right? In the foreground with the other one that's peeking up from down beneath it. Right? What's going on with them? But you'll notice everywhere, every element, the rocks, the cracks in the rocks of Golgotha, all appear almost as if they're in perspective, right? And as you work your way up the hill, and I don't have anything in detail, find them online, to what I presume is supposed to be Jerusalem, right? You can see figures walking up the side of that man-made road, carved in the midst of the road, and how even every single building is sort of, it's not impressionistically done, but it's delineated, right? Sharply delineated. The clouds themselves have that same quality of being delineated. You get a sense that he's really interested also in how the crosses were within perspective, right? It's again a kind of an obsessive way of painting, and this is again still in egg tempera, right? So this is that not oil-based paint, but that kind of paint that dries opaque. And so you lay it down in strokes, and if you remember from the National Guard, you can see this sometimes, right? Because each stroke doesn't dry transparent, it dries opaque, and you can still see them, so it's built up with just a series of hairline strokes everywhere you look. Okay? Some of the figures, such as I believe St. John on the far left, have a sense of sort of classical contrapposto, where their pose is that weight shift from ancient Greek art. Next to him is the Virgin Mary fainting dead away into the arms of one of the other holy women there at the foot of the cross, right? Having seen her son suffer and die. We see to the right of the cross, we see holy people on one side, not so holy on the other, right? The holy people on Christ's right side, that's the better side. The bad people on his left. And there are the soldiers who are gambling for Christ's clothes, right? Other members of the centurions and that group on the right. Even the horse seems to be rendered in perspective, right? With its hind toward us. We're showing all three of these because, again, this is an idea of Mantegna's style, right? Notice the rocks and how they are rendered with so many linear elements, right? Edges and lines and cracks and highlights and shadows, all as a sort of web or a matrix of lines that make up the figure. Again, the perspective that dominates things, and the sense that that sarcophagus that Christ is rising out of may well be based on having looked at some real Roman examples, not necessarily a strongly decorated one like the rich would have had. That wouldn't be proper. But even the perspective dominating now the figures. Look at the great foreshortening of the guy who with the red cap, right, with his legs toward us, right, and how he's really at the end sort of obsessively trying to get that right. The third of these images, from the predella. Okay, now that didn't change. There it is the agony in the garden. This is the moment when Christ, just before the crucifixion, just before his capture, goes up to a mountaintop with three disciples who can't even stay awake. Christ says this. Look at all I've done for you, and you can't even stay awake, right? But it's nighttime, right? And there's a bright light, and there's that whole thing. There's Christ on the right, praying just before his, the worst of the passion is about to start, saying, God, if you can hear it anyway, could you please, let me not go through this? It's going to hurt. He says, what he says quite literally is, let this cup pass from me. So you often see a cup right there. In this case, you see an angel up there answering Christ's prayer, and there's the three sleeping apostles here. This is the moment when Judas then appears almost immediately, kisses Christ to identify him, and he's captured, led away to begin his torture. And on the path that leads up to Jerusalem in the background, and again, notice the obsessiveness of the detail, the obsessiveness of the drawing. But you'll notice that there's a group of Judas and the centurions working their way down the path, coming across that tiny little bridge, to come across another little bridge where there's a cute little bunny rabbit, right? They're on their way here, right? And bunnies are often seen as symbols of sin, prodigiously made, right? That's usually why they are. So to have here that bunny on the path that Judas is leading the Roman guard to capture Christ is the idea that this, from this direction, bad things are coming, right? So, again, this gives us this introduction to Mantegna's working style, which is so very, again, obsessive, minute, right, precise. Now, he often reworks compositions for independent work. So here's another Agony in the Garden. This one's also in the textbook from London, where, again, same scene that we have on the right, and you can see he's sort of just using the opportunity to re-envision how to lay the scene out, right? But notice, now that this is a somewhat larger panel than that predella is, and a great, its own singular focus, you can start to see the way that the rocks sort of almost look like frozen lava in a way. They have those striations that kind of come down in those shale-like plateaus. And that's typical for Mantegna. You see them on the left, looks almost like the steps that Christ climbs to go up on top of the mountain. And then in the background as well, they have that sort of sedimentary quality. Again, I like this idea that Mantegna envisions himself as an archaeologist, even though that term didn't really exist yet, right? But that, that he's even interested in geography, the archaeology of the earth, if you will, not just Roman artifacts. Right? If we look at the details of this, we can see there's Judas leading the Romans this way. Christ is over there. They probably can't see him from where he's at. But he's leading them on a path that we can follow, again with bunny rabbits on it, that leads to the three sleeping apostles on this side of the rock. And Judas is here now betraying Christ. The group leads up that path into the background. You can see they work their way back into space quite well. And through a couple of gates into, again, a very, very precisely drawn city. behind it, which is typical for Mantegna's work.
Why is the bunny rabbit hole?
That's a good question. Where are the bunny rabbit hole left? And that would be something that if this were somebody's term paper topic, which you can't see because it's not here, would be something to answer. I don't have the answer to that, why they would be there as well. But it is something that we see often, and in fact, in the work that you're thinking of working on, I think, someone else was registered at St. Jerome. Who's doing the Bellini St. Jerome? Crystal is, right? They're there in the background. So one has to be careful when one deals with the symbolism of animals, in that one has to realize that you may read that there are some standard symbolisms, but sometimes when they're deployed in a particular way, that violates that symbolism, and we can't really say for sure. Right? I also quite like the birds in the foreground, right, bathing in that little stream, as well as that very, very large pelican up above. Pelicans are symbols for Christ, almost invariably, because they were believed in the Middle Ages to feed their young by plucking their side, and the baby pelicans would eat the blood of the mother. So the idea of bleeding from your side, Christ bled from his side on the cross, his blood is the communion that is our spiritual food, yada, 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 right? So the pelican is a standard trope, a standard theme, symbol for Christ, right? So we got anyways, they're very playful bunnies, right? I like the one on the right is, so I tried to play with the one next to it. They're really cute, right? So I guess one of the questions, why are they out there? But they certainly also, I think, Mantegna understands that on one level there's the symbolism, but there's another level in which they activate the scene and they move your eye around and they get you to focus on things. And again, as I mentioned earlier, for Mantegna, he doesn't leave any part of the canvas empty, unfocused. And that'll be something we'll see Bellini picks up from him, right? He's a little bit older than Bellini, right? But he and Bellini work side by side. And early Bellinis, Giovanni Bellinis, are often very, very difficult to tell from Mantegna's. So we'll look at a Bellini out of Agony in the Garden. It's just like this, right? Surprising. Jane, how'd you answer?
Oh, I was just going to comment on the writing on the
here, I got a detail.
I just thought that maybe it represents like how the bunnies on the road represent the sin of the apostles, including Judas, and then the bunny gloves because Judas is about to take away their sin through the cross.
It could be. I think that's perfectly valid. I don't think there's any one meaning that sort of cancels out others. One of the things I was just sort of thinking about as I was looking at them here as you were answering is the fact that look at where they are relative to Christ, right? They're on that other, kind of on the other side of that rock, and it's almost like he doesn't really see them from where he is, right? Because of the shadow of the rock, you imagine where these things are in space, and they're sort of around the other side of that rock, right? They're over here, he's over here, and this is a moment when Christ has some serious doubts, right? Insofar as Christ has any doubts. So this is a moment when he knows his duty, okay? This is a moment when he knows what's coming, and he doesn't really, if there's any way out of this, please, right? And that's a moment of very precarious moral place for him. It's probably as precarious as he ever got anywhere in his life, right? Is this moment when he would say, oh, God, I don't want to do this. Very human thing to do. So the bunny's there, could be there for Christ's coming as close as he's ever going to come to giving into earthly desire, which would be the desire to preserve your flesh, right? Not earthly desire is carnal sin, right? Or that, but it's this idea that I don't want to have to suffer like that. So the bunnies could be there for that as well. But it doesn't mean that what he's doing is wrong because he's not really looking at them. You'll notice that these bunnies in particular, are they playing or are they fighting? These ones look like they're fighting, don't they? They're squaring off, right? Now, maybe my dogs do that, and they're just goofing off, right? And my dogs do that as well, like little Mandrake does that to poor Jasper. Because he wants to sit where Jasper is, because it's all nice and warm, so I go up and bat at him a couple times. My dog will turn and growl at him and then go to the other room. And that's exactly what those bunnies do. Yeah.
White birds, do you know what they are? Heron or...
I don't know what they are, to be honest. They kind of look almost like a heron. The one on the right does, doesn't it? Or maybe they're baby pelicans, because they're directly on axis to meet the adult pelican up above. right? And the neck of the one on the right with the beak, right, is white versus black. I don't know. I'd have to go. What I would do is I would go find the big thick catalog on the National Gallery of London, things by Lorne Campbell, and see what he's got to say about this, right? Or Nicholas Penny, probably one of those, right? And see what they've got to say. I really don't know. But these are the sorts of questions one asks. Why is that there, and what does it mean, right?
I know the paper, and I know that Karen Source and there's another Goldberg and the same family, they have a significant meaning in Christian symbolism.
Yeah.
That was just one thing.
Yeah, I'm sure there is something there that one would pull out. Right. I wanted to show you a couple of other Mantegnas, one more before we get to works of Martin Luther, because he did a couple of St. Sebastian, but these are now early on, right? His early years in the 50s, he's still in Padua. St. Sebastian, do you know the story of St. Sebastian? You ever see the Losing My Religion video from R.E.M. back about 15 years ago? He used a lot of St. Sebastian imagery. Those of us who are older might remember this. St. Sebastian was shot full of arrows, as you might guess. Oddly enough, it didn't kill him, right? He was actually nursed back to health, had all the arrows removed, and was nursed back to health, and eventually he was stoned to death, and his body was thrown in the Cloaca Maxima in Rome, which is the underground sewer. So this is not what killed St. Sebastian, but it's how he most often appears, and he's a patron saint of all sorts of skin disease sufferers because of this, and also because he didn't kill him. So it's hard to imagine that you could get shot through the neck and have it come out of your forehead and not die, but that was the case, right? That this, in fact, didn't kill him. Now, what I'm most interested in here are these elements of style that we're talking about that are hallmarks of Mantegna's work. Note, for example, the two-point perspective diamond-shaped floor, right? That perspective study that he's learned from Jacopo Bellini. The incredible detail to the landscape background behind it. I've got some good details because this particular work is in Vienna. Is part of the Google Art Project, so that you can find a monster pixel version online, which is nice. But there's a path. Notice every single rock, right, along this path. Again, he's got that obsessive nature. He's not okay sort of doing things like an impressionist, where you would give the idea of rocks. He's going to draw the rocks. And every one of them he's going to draw with a flinty side and a shadowed side and color and whatnot. It's not a bunny rabbit, right? On the path back there as these archers. Again, they're the people, right? They're done. This is the people that have killed him. Or not killed him, but tortured him, right? Our work here is done. Let's go back home. Hard day's work, it's Miller time, right? We're done killing things today. And they think they're done, but they tell them that, of course, they haven't. Again, that sort of striated, linear pattern to the rocks, especially in the hill in the background. He loves to build rocks up in these, like they're a sheet of paper, or stack a ream of paper that he sort of shuffled around and use that to build the mill out of it. Right? The inscription that you see there next to St. Sebastian is actually Greek, and it reads Mantegna painted this in Greek. So if we go back to this idea of Mantegna as this amateur archaeologist, right? That he's learned enough from Greco-Roman art not only to get these acanthus patterns perfect, right, looking like Roman acanthus patterns, like you see on the details of them, but also then to understand the Greek alphabet, how to write in it, right? It's pretty incredible, yeah. More rabbits and boats leading our way back deep into the distance of Alps. You know that Venice sits right at the foot of the Alps, right? I mean, it's right there. So in addition to having all these trade routes to the east, they sat on the easiest path to get through. The Brenner Pass is the easiest path to get through over land in Northern Europe. It's right there outside of Venice, just outside of Verona. Right? So the Alps are really very much a part of the Venetian experience, and something you see to forget about because the eyes are almost always on the sea. But I remember the one most recent time. I've been to Venice twice. Last time I went was a long time ago. But I remember going to get the car from the car park, which is just outside the city, and I got up at the top of the car park, and it was the Alps. And it just sort of blew me away. I hadn't even thought that we were that close because everything's lagoony, you know, it's just water everywhere. And you look back, and that's what you see, right? You see the Alps back there. So it's pretty phenomenal. And there they are. Again, Mantegna, typical Mantegna delineation. His archaeological sense, his interest in Roman ruins and Roman statuary comes clear in these fragments of reliefs and statues that are strewn about the feet of Saint Sebastian. Even the ruined post that he's been tied to has a sense of being archaeologically researched. He's not, you know, he wants to make sure that this is as clean and good and as accurate as it can possibly be. It looks as if it's a ruined triumphal arch. We can see the brick core. He knows how these were built. You know that most Roman buildings are brick and then faced in marble rather than being built out of marble itself. This was in fact a Roman law from around 100 AD onward that you had to build in brick because it didn't burn as easily as marble would. This is after Nero and the fire, right? But we have a view. Look at that great marble column that he's tied to, right? You can even see the translucence of the marble, can't you? Fantastic, right? Wouldn't you love to be able to do that? Kick myself in the teeth, right? Just look at that, though. That, I mean, when you get up close like that, and especially this bit right in here, it's just phenomenal. As a sort of, you know, a trompe l'oeil, a fooling of your eye to make you think that the paint isn't paint, but the paint is this marble that he's made. On the arch itself, as you can see, extends off the frame to the right. You can see this figure standing there, and then again with the very credible crack to the cornice above it. But well, here's the Arch of Septus Severus in the Forum in Rome, and you can see he's been looking, right? He's going to get it not spot accurate, and maybe it is spot accurate, but not the Septus Severus. But there's a sense of what he's depicted here is in fact very credible, right? I wanted to say it was incredible, but that's the exact opposite of that. It's credible. It's believable. It's accurate. He's applied a certain archaeological interest to the setting of the scene. And this body of Saint Sebastian also seems to derive from any number of potential Greco-Roman statuary types, particularly things by Praxiteles, with the sort of languid contrapposto, with the weight on one leg, the other leg flat, and the way the hip shot shoots far out to the side. And then the physiognomy seems very much to owe its genesis, owe its birth, to, again, this ongoing study of Roman art. So this gives you an idea of what Mantegna is all about, right? These three major works, the San Zeno Altarpiece from your text, the Agony in the Garden from your text, and then this wonderful St. Sebastian, which anybody studying Roman art ought to see at some point in their life, from Vienna. Now, we're lucky to have a couple of Mantegnas here in town. Three of them on display. Unfortunately, the three paintings that we have from Mantegna each has problems of their own. This little infant Savior is in not the best of shape. It's again missing the upper layer of paint that's either been abraded away or cleaned away. So he is not as well delineated. The shadows are deeper than they ought to be. The highlights not as well modeled as they might be. But you can see the Mantegna elements we've been talking about. Look at the linear quality to the wrinkles of Christ's robe, right? They're handled very much like the landscape backgrounds that we saw, those stratifications and lines that run horizontally. So it's almost like it's been wrapped up, you know, in gauze almost. Like you with your finger, if it was bleeding really bad. You wrap it again and again and again and again, and you start to get this bunched up and built up around. But even the way that it falls around his thighs down below, where those horizontal folds turn vertical on it, it almost looks like the cross-section of a pine board or something, where you're seeing the grain of a board, you know. But it's because he's kind of so obsessively making those crisp-edged folds that you see everywhere. That said, this is a good baby, isn't it? We've seen some pretty crappy babies, pretty bad-looking babies in this class, right? But this is a pretty good one, right? He doesn't look like he looks like a baby. His legs are squat, he's pudgy. He doesn't look like a man that's just been shrunk down, right? The face, the head, the proportions, right? Baby heads are bigger relative to the body. The limbs are squatter, right? He's got that, even though he's still standing in contrapposto, right? He's got the one long leg, the other one relaxed. But it's a really credible baby. The Bellini family, they're pretty good at it, right? Now, even though he looks like a baby, he doesn't behave like one. And so you'll notice that he's blessing us in the pose that a priest would bless us from the altar, right? The Latin term for this is pax vobis, which means peace be with you, peace be unto you, right? And so that's the pose he makes. He's a priest on earth, or maybe the priest himself is Christ's representative on earth, is what the idea that you would get from this. And you'll also notice that even though he's in these sort of swaddling clothes and really looks like a good pudgy-faced baby should, he's wearing a very regal, royal-looking robe, isn't he? Now, the exact color is hard to say. Right now it's kind of burgundy, right? Probably originally more purple than that, would make it imperial, right? And look in particular, I've got a detail, right? At the gilding, right, around the hem of that, as well as the gold thread that runs down the edges of it. This is a very adult piece of clothing that the infant Christ wears. And then, of course, he's carrying that cross in his hand. That, although it's a very, very fine filigree, very thin, very elegant, is still the trappings of royalty, the trappings of power. So it presents to us this dual message. On the one hand, he's baby Christ, Q5. On the other hand, he is God, the ruler of heaven. Right? So at the moment that he's born, at the moment that he's an infant, he is also fully mature, fully incarnate, fully everything is going to be. Just hasn't humanly aged yet. Look at the great detail of Jesus' proper right eye, how the light hits the side of the eye, right, just inside the pupil itself, and then it comes in over here on the other side of the inside. I've said this before, last semester I said it all the time. If you as an artist, those of you who are artists here, have any problems you're trying to figure out, go to the National Gallery and see how the guys did it. Almost every answer to every problem you've got in the studio, you can find a solution to at the National Gallery for free, right? You may not be as good as them. I'll never be as good as Mantegna. I used to think I was a good draftsman. I would never be as good. I don't have that kind of patience, right? But there's a really good lesson on how to model the eye in the socket is the lens. Right there, right? You could do a lot worse. Or even how to get the light to work around the face. Now, granted that, doesn't it look like someone punched him in his left cheek? It's a little bit big at this point. Or maybe his wisdom teeth are impacted, right? So in any event, again, that's partly because the upper layer of varnish is not what it once was. Yeah, exactly right. It's just been cleaned, over-cleaned at some point. It's not the National Gallery's fault. Finally, one of the things, again, for some historical context, okay, this is an odd little picture, isn't it? Baby Jesus, probably originally standing on a pillow, but that's all been sort of messed up as well. And just sort of focused and blessing us there, right? Almost like a vision, in a way. It's probably based on a well-known prototype. There were a couple of paintings in the Veneto, in Padua, that showed the Virgin Mary presenting Christ. One had a sort of a window frame around her. The other one, this one I kind of picture of, excuse me. But this one, I think, one of the two, was actually figured in a church production of a nativity play, right? So this was, instead of having an actor play Jesus and the actress or the actor play the Virgin Mary, they had a picture play then which gave it a certain importance in the devotional minds of people because those plays presented things come to life almost, right? And so you imagine this as being part of it. It's in horrible shape, right? It's really ugly to see anyway. But if you look at the Jesus figure there and how he's swaddled and how he's sort of presented to us frontally, you can see the parallelism between Mantegna just sort of separated it out from that. So the object that we're looking at here, we've been talking about as an art object. But in many respects, the object is also what we would call a cult object. And I use cult in the broadest and non-pejorative sense, right? To say it's not a cult, but when we talk about cult objects, means they function within a particular religious mindset, right? And this one certainly was tapping into this idea of this presentation of Christ within a dramatic context around the time of the Christmas nativity, right? So there we are. Okay, there's 4:45. We'll pick up. I've got two more Mantegnas to show you painting-wise, and then we'll look at his engravings, which are fantastic. Maybe the best engravings from the 15th century period, at least out of Italy. So that'll be on Monday. Because we're behind on Mantegna and all goes back to me being sick, we're not going to start talking about Bellini on Tuesday. So put off your response till Friday. Okay? For the next week. You don't need them because we're going to be still dealing with Mantegna on Tuesday. I'm not going to start talking about Bellini, so there's no point in being all ready to talk about it on Tuesday and finishing up Mantegna. Okay? So I'll send you all an email reminder, but the Goffin article on Bellini Friday instead of Tuesday. Okay? Good. If you see anybody who wasn't here today, tell them to.